Welcome to the Creative Agency Success Show, the go-to resource for agency owners looking to scale their business. Join us every week to stay ahead of the curve and position your agency for future success.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second show of the VCFO Deep Dive. Today, I'm very excited to talk about a podcast done by Jason Swenk. This podcast is called the Smart Agency Podcast. So Jody and I have been listening to some of Jason's stuff after we interviewed him. And I believe you were on his podcast as well, Jody, weren't you recently?
Yeah. Jason's an awesome podcast interviewer. Yeah, very excited to talk about a recent podcast he had with Tim Condon.
Yeah, so we had Jason on the show and we talked to him and kind of found out about all that he's doing for agencies. So I'm sure Jason will be on this episode again. We'll find some more of his podcast because he's always releasing great stuff. But today we're going to start with episode 692 of Jason's Smart Agency Podcast. And on that episode, he has Tim Condon. And the title of the podcast is What All Successful Agencies Have in Common. So that was something that really drew me into this podcast. That's something that I thought our listeners would like to hear. And we're just going to kind of go through and analyze it and use our categories. So any general thoughts on the podcast before we kind of go into the categories, Jody?
Yeah, I thought it relates really to what we're seeing right now with agencies with pipeline and maybe it's shrinking a little bit, maybe it's expanding a little bit, the close ratios, the distance, the length of time in the close cycle, all that kind of stuff. He talks a little bit about it and about being creative about it. So I'm real excited to see, because I think this is going to hit home for a lot of folks out there listening to the podcast today.
Yep, I definitely agree. I think there's a lot of marketing talk here, a lot of just really good ideas that I think any listener would really appreciate listening to. So again, if you're listening to this podcast, you might want to hear us talk first, and then go back and listen to his podcast afterwards. And I think you'll get a lot out of this. So let's jump right into the categories. Just for reminders for our listeners, we have 10 categories. We're not going to use all of them. We're going to use the ones that we thought stood out the most to us. I think we had either 4 or 5 today. Some might overlap a little bit because Jody and I don't compare notes before we go. So we both listen to the podcast separately, listen to what topics we want, and then we kind of go through it. So that's kind of how the format works here. So we'll start with topic number 1 on this one. So this is the ROI rocket, the idea that could financially benefit your business. So there was a lot of ideas in this one. What did you pick for this topic, Jody?
What did I pick for this topic?
Yep.
This is definitely the topic that I did pick.
Okay.
And I talked about basically building a strong email list. I think was the idea that I really got from it. And it's kind of coincidentally, at Summit, we've always been, hey, we're kind of anti-emailing, and we're changing our philosophy a little bit right now. We're going to actually start attacking emailing as a part of our marketing, go-to marketing strategy. And so super excited to listen to how they, basically this conversation that Jason and Tim had, because it really is bringing things home to what we're currently doing today at Summit.
So let's dive into that just a little bit. So what made us make this change? What made Summit Anders really think about using an email pattern, which we haven't done before?
Yeah, so we've always had the idea that as clients contact us, as we build an email list, that we eventually do basically a drip campaign after we've contacted the client. So we've always kind of done it after the fact, but we're going to actually put a little bit more on steroids. We brought in two individuals from Chief Outsiders, basically a virtual CMO firm, and they recommended email marketing as being one of the number one forms of attracting new clients. And so we thought, hey, let's do it. The biggest thing that I wanted to make sure that we didn't do in that process is I didn't want it to be a generic email, that spammy email looking thing. I wanted it to be at least informative for the person receiving it. So whether they actually pop on and hop on and want to take us, take the opportunity to see if we'd be a good fit, at least they're benefiting from the email, and hey, here's a new article that we're writing, here's a new concepts, or here's what we're hearing in the industry, something that can really be a benefit to them in the long run, just as opposed to just being a spammy email.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think this kind of ties to my ROI rocket, but I think I have a little bit different here. So what I had is a quote that they said that I just loved, and it was around the 14-minute mark. I can't remember who said it, but I think it was Jason, and he said, standing out is great, but conversion is crucial. So I had that as my ROI rocket. And I think that kind of ties back to what you just said about email marketing is like you can send the wildest email, or you can, have people watch some video you create and think it's the coolest thing in the world, but it doesn't matter if you're not able to convert it to a sale. And so I thought that was a pretty amazing comment, and just kind of think about that. So many people do marketing just to stand out and just to get their name said, but like you could have a million people know about you and zero sales, and it's not going to mean anything. And so that was really the moment that kind of jumped out to me is for the ROI is like if the more sales you convert, the more of those leads you convert, it really becomes crucial. So that was kind of the area that jumped out to me is that ROI rocket.
So he said, "But standing out is great, but conversion is crucial."
Yes.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. And this is, I think you probably have this in one of the other categories, but I'm going to jump into it now. And if we want to just skip over the other category, this is where he started talking about the annual survey that they send out. And this was at the point where Tim was talking and they sent the annual survey. And so some of the numbers that they came up with, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on these numbers here is first when they talked about the sales cycle. They said when they sent the survey out, they said 50% of their clients average over a month sales cycle, and 20% were over 3 months. So, what is your thoughts on those numbers in terms of that being your sales cycle?
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty typical in the industry right now. In looking at ours, I mean, ours isn't too far from that. It used to be our average cycle was between 2 weeks to a month, and that's grown to basically a month plus. Just over the last year, and so we're seeing it even on our side. That the sales cycle is taking a little bit longer than what it's taken in the past. It's kind of interesting how he brought up a good way of reducing that sales cycle, and his way of reducing it was basically giving away a product or having a very cheap product to get them, at least entice them into trying you out a little bit. And so I thought that was kind of a neat way to bring it from that he said 2 months to basically a week sales cycle, which I thought was pretty cool idea.
Yep, and I definitely have that. One of my later topics is kind of that idea. So I'll dive into that a little bit later here. But the other number he brought out was about close percentage, and he said first off, he said it was all over the map. And his number, which I think is different than what you've said in the past, I kind of want to dig into this a little bit, is he said anything around 10% is outstanding when it comes to a close percentage. So what is your thought on that 10% number?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand what he's talking about here because there's different close percentages, and so what he's talking about is the number of people in your pipeline to what actually converts to a sale, and 10% is a very reasonable number. And I did some research in HubSpot about that and trying to get an idea where that was at, and it seemed like that close percentage fell right within where we're seeing industry wide. The close percentage I talk about are actually the qualified leads that a salesperson truly talks to and
Okay.
what they close from that. And that should be, in my opinion, about a 30% close ratio. Between 20 and 30% is probably best practice. Ours is hovered right at about 35% for going on about seven years now. So it's been a little bit higher than the average there, but I would say a 20% to 30% would be pretty solid, for a lot of companies. I think the close ratio is higher. I think there's some inherent problems, meaning the product probably isn't priced to where it needs to be is the biggest problem there. So, and we battled that when we first started. At Summit, we were offering a service thinking nobody would pay for it, and our close ratio was high. We're like, "Oh, this is great. We're high-fiving everybody," and it was so high that we were picking on so many clients so quickly that we couldn't actually service them. We couldn't be profitable, and we had to actually increase basically increase our price in order to get our close ratio down to where it's at that it's at that 30 to 35%. So that was a technique we used in order to help pricing a value-based product. And so for those firms out there that are looking to do that, I think it's important to note that, hey, just because you have a high close ratio doesn't mean that things are going well. There might be some inherent issues there. Don't let that close ratio fool you into a non-profitable company.
And I think that's really important. So I think we haven't talked about that 10% very often. So I think it's really important to know both those numbers, right? And so I think that's one of the insights I'm taking from this episode is that, okay, I want a 10% overall close rate and then somewhere around a 35% qualified close rate. And I think that's something our listeners can take from this episode is think about both those numbers, right? And if you have, let's say you have a 10% close rate, but a 50% qualified close rate, that's something you can talk about and think about, okay, what are we doing here? Maybe we're selling this for too high. And so we're reaching a lot of people, so we're getting the right number there, but maybe we're selling it for too high. So I think having an understanding of both those numbers will be really important. So I'm going to jump in.
And let me back up. Let's make sure we understand exactly what it is, because the terminology may be different from firm to firm, from whatever. Yeah. What we're calling a sale, basically what HubSpot defines as and I popped up HubSpot to kind of compare some of those numbers that were in the podcast, and HubSpot says a sales win rate is defined as the percentage of the final stage prospects that closed and became customers divided by the number of deals in the pipeline in any given period. So that's what we're talking about there, and that's what I think Tim is referring to in the sales call. And that's called a sales win rate. A sales close rate, according to HubSpot, is the number of deals a salesperson closes divided by the number of lead opportunities they're given or they're fed during a given period. So again, not everybody in the pipeline is going to actually talk to a salesperson. But once they do, that's when the sales close rate is defined.
That's when they can be qualified.
Yeah, and that's when it's truly a qualified lead. That's correct.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay, so this next one you had something for and I didn't, but I'm guessing we're going to have some overlap here in some of the stuff we've already talked about. So the one that you identified was the unicorn, which is the most unique thought of the episode. So what did you have for this?
Yeah, I thought the unique thought was that Tim had spoke about how he basically had to come up with email leads. That was his basic thing, email leads. And what he did is he combined and he leveraged two different established brands in order to achieve that. And so I thought that was kind of a very unique way of doing it, not just for one of his clients. So one of his clients was, I think, the Washington Post, and he basically combined the Papa John's brand and the Washington Post brand, and that's how he was able to generate a ton of leads, and it was super successful. And the nice thing about that is, thinking through it, I'm guessing, don't know, but I'm guessing the Washington Post and Papa John's were probably clients of his, and so he used two solid clients in order to really work together and to achieve that, which I thought was an outstanding idea for especially somebody that's in his position.
Yeah, I had this as well, and I had this under category number 7, which is the visionary vantage. So that's the best piece of advice for leaders. So I think we're on the same page here, and kind of the questions he was asking, which I thought were really kind of something I chewed on after the podcast and kind of thought about over the next day or so is what assets do I have and what am I looking for, right? So that's something that any salesperson or any business owner should really think about is what assets do I have? And assets, obviously, we're not talking physical assets. We're talking about what tips or what tools do you have at your fingertips as a business owner based on your life, based on your experiences, based on people you know. Those are all assets you have and things you can take advantage of. And then think about it and ask, what am I looking for? What do I need? Do I need sales leads? Do I need email marketing? What exactly am I looking for? And then you ask yourself the second question, how can I use my assets to generate what I need? So the story he told is, okay, I have this connection with Papa John's. I have this connection with the Washington Post. How can I want to like make the Washington Post happier? I want to make I think that was his ultimate goal, was to make a connection with Washington Post. So he used his connection with Papa John's to connect those two and really created this awesome campaign. And so I think that's the question I've been thinking about as obviously a leader in our organization is, okay, what assets do we have in this organization and how can we use them for what we need? And I think that's a question that any business owner should be thinking about, and obviously taking inventory of their assets all the time, because, not that you're using people, but it's just a lot of times, like this example, both sides are going to benefit from this. Like I think Papa John's and Washington Post are both extremely happy with what came out of this.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because kind of taking that even to the next level. I mean, we always get those clients that kind of ghost us over time, or our prospects that ghost us, where they're hot and heavy. We may quote them. They sound like, hey, this is going to be we're the best thing since sliced bread. And then they kind of disappear for 3 weeks. And you're like, well, did they fall off their face of the earth? Did they change their mind? We always think ourselves the worst case scenario. Oh, they decided to go elsewhere. And one of our vertical leaders came to me, was it yesterday or day before, and said, hey, I think I'm going to call this lead a dead lead, and we're not going to pursue it anymore. And it was one of those leads that we thought we actually thought we're going to close. And so I said, well, hey, why don't you just send them some information? Send them a link to your newest, your latest podcast, or send them to that book, that white page book that we wrote about financial, forecasting regarding to their vertical, send them something like that. Don't mention anything about the conversation. Just say, hey, I saw this, thought of you, and here's a, see what, get what you think type of thing. And he did. And it's kind of ironically, the very next day, I'm like, hey, I'm going to meet with this person in a couple of weeks. What do you want me to say to him? He goes, don't worry about it. I'm meeting with him today. He called me right back from that conversation, or we have a sales call later today with it. And I thought, just that right there, using current assets that you have. Those assets might be connections with clients. They may be pieces of literature that you've written. It may be, it may be somebody you just know. Take advantage of the assets in order to, establish credibility and help that sales process.
I love that example because, yeah, obviously his example here was two connections he had, and your example is as a marketing department, how many assets are you creating? Like again, we're creating an asset right now. We're creating this podcast. We're creating assets when we do webinars. We're creating assets when we go out and speak and have those connections. And so, yeah, you constantly have to be working on creating those assets. But if you have all the assets in the world but you never use them, like why have them, right? And so I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a great example. The other example I was thinking about is some of the connections we make that are vendors, right? Like the banking assets we have, like all the connections we have with banks and lenders. And maybe when you're on a call with a prospective client and they're talking about that being their issue, and then you haven't heard from them for a couple of weeks, and be like, hey, I know we talked a lot about finding a lender. Here's a great lender you guys can reach out to, and you're not necessarily their CFO, but you're possibly giving them that resource that they really need. They're like, oh wow, Jody really does have a ton of connections. And so I think that's something that we can do in the agency space as well. Is someone comes up with an idea in a sales call, and you want to help them with it, like send them the connections there, and that's one of those assets you could definitely use. Okay, so that was my number 7 and your number 4. So kind of combined there. So let's jump to number 10. So 10 is the campaign carnival. So this is the best piece of marketing or pipeline advice. Now, again, I think we may have stepped on this one a little bit, but I have something unique for this one. But I'm curious before I get started, what did you have for the campaign carnival?
Yeah, Campaign Carnival with Papa John's. I mean, I think the deal that they had, or that Tim coordinated with the individual Papa John's, was that, hey, we're going to give away a pizza. So they're giving away a free pizza in order to achieve, to basically gain all these different emails. And I thought that was a unique idea. Hey, let's give away something in order to achieve what we have. And I thought that was a big big idea. Financially, they're actually truly are paying for those leads. They're just paying for it in a different way. And what they'd found out in the process is that Papa John said was one of the biggest draws that they've had. Doing that, I think they gave away like 100,000 pizzas or something like that. In that process, so they gave away a lot of money to do it, but they in turn got a ton of lead opportunities, which is what they were ultimately looking for.
And I think the funny part of that story was they were expecting it to be a big deal in the Washington area. And this was kind of the early internet days. And they're getting calls from Florida, and
Mm-hmm.
Papa John's is getting calls from all these other
Yeah,
states. Why isn't my coupon code working? And so I think that was kind of cool how like
yeah,
sometimes there's these other advantages that come from it that you don't expect.
yeah, exactly.
So my number 10 was different, but I think you're not going to be surprised by what I picked up from this one, Jody. So he talks about this twice in the podcast. He talks about it very early on, so around the 5-minute mark, and then also towards the end around the 21-minute mark. But he talks a lot about systems. And the quote that I picked up is, "It's hard to build a business if you don't invest in hefty systems." So everybody knows, it's listened to me, and I've probably mentioned it 100 times on this podcast, I'm a huge E-Myth guy. And the reason I'm a huge E-Myth guy is because of the binder. He talks about going to that hotel and the experience he has every time and the systems that are created. And I think that's something that I don't think a lot of people often think about when it comes to marketing. Is you think marketing is just having a guy that can talk really well and go and sell deals, but you have to have a process that's built that can be duplicated by others. And so to me, that's the one thing that if you don't have that within your organization and you don't have that within your marketing department, and you just kind of trust your instincts and go off your instincts of your salesperson, then you are definitely never going to scale to where you want to scale. So that was something I definitely picked up here and really thought was a great piece of advice.
Yeah, I love that, because he also said that you can't really grow just on referrals alone, which was kind of an interesting concept. And so you have to be able to, you can to a certain point, but after that, I think the systems and process that you're mentioning had to be put in place in order to scale at a high rate. So 100% agree. Great quote. It's hard to build a business if you don't invest in systems. Love it.
So I'm going to ask you on this one, Jody. So you obviously were a rainmaker for a while with when we were just Summit CPA, and you were able to really develop a sales system and a sales process that really met your personality. At what point did you realize that what you were actually creating was a process that could be duplicated?
That's a great question. So let's kind of back up a little bit. So the process was or the base of the process, we're going to call it thought leadership. And the thought leadership that we approached it initially was, hey, we're going to go to conferences in which, we're going to look at where qualified buyers are going to be at, because they're going to be folks that are in our industry, folks at a certain dollar size that are in the industry. And we're going to teach them how to be profitable. And the idea was, we're not going to teach them on what a virtual CFO does. I mean, that never comes up in the conversation. We don't want to talk about the pieces and parts of it. We want to talk about, hey, the benefits that they're going to receive. And so how to be profitable. And we kind of opened our books up and showed them our playbook. Here's what we talk about. Here's how much cash you should have in the bank. Here's how to develop a forecast, and all that kind of good stuff. The pipeline that we're talking about in this episode is part of that. And so all these different things that we're giving away to clients. And so then the idea was, hey, we're going to do this repeatedly over time. And then hopefully, clients, if they can do exactly what we're saying, high five to them. That's awesome. That has more gratification than actually them coming and us helping them out. But if they do need our help, then we're here to help out. So it's kind of a long-term play. And with that, again, we would over and over do this at conferences, and eventually, after it was probably 4 or 5 conferences, we started then picking up clients. So it took a while to actually get established and get our rhythm and really figure out how to do it. So that was the conference idea. And so with that, we would have probably out of each conference, we would average about 3 folks that would be, that would come to us, say, hey, we definitely are interested. We'd close maybe one of those on average. Now, keep in mind, we might go to this conference, 10 times, and somebody, 5 years ago is calling us. And so what I'm saying is, 3 times for everyone is probably what we had. And then again, a 30% closing ratio. So that was the idea. And then the idea then also was that we would market material towards those individuals. So all of our marketing would be focused on creative agencies. It would be talking about, hey, here's what here's for creative agencies, here's the new tax laws that are going to impact you. Here's what your pipeline should be based on, what we're seeing. Here's how to protect yourself in a recession if a recession does happen, and some easy things that are related to agency. So everything was really agency focused. And so that was the idea. That was the playbook. Hey, let's become a thought leader. Let's write books on it. Let's do white pages. Let's make sure that all of our CFOs have super high knowledge in it, know the vernacular, understand what a creative agency is. And that ended up being super successful in bringing on clients, but it also was very successful on retaining clients. Because again, as part of the sales process, you just don't want to bring on clients and churn them really quick. That's not a good process, right? And so the long tail process is that, hey, if you can keep a client for 4 years plus, then hey, that's not a bad deal. And ours has always been over 4 years. It's between I'd say it's probably 4.25 right now, years that a client typically will stay with us before they graduate from Summit CPA, type of thing. And graduating means that they've gotten to a point where they're going to sell, or they've gotten to a point where they're so large now they really need to bring somebody internally, which are both huge success points for us. It sucks we lose a client, but again, great for the client because we got them to the stage that they wanted to be coming to us. And so then the question is, how do you duplicate that, and how do you replicate that with other industries? Cannabis being a perfect example. I don't smoke, don't use cannabis in any means, whether it's for health reasons or other. I've never done that. And so how would I be that person to be able to speak in front of owners of cannabis agencies? Well, probably not that person. So what we had to do is we had to go out and find somebody that really has a passion for that industry. And so that's when we did our search, and we found an individual. And with that individual, now that person can then replicate it. He can then go out and speak at different events and kind of take the processes we put into place and replicate that into that industry. And again, it's a long play. It's not a short-term game. It's not like you're going to start this and we expect all these sales come in right away, but they will come in over time, and that's what we're starting to see now, where we're starting to get opportunities. Now that we've had this in process for a year, we're starting to see opportunities. They're slow going, but we are seeing opportunities in that field because of the process we put in place in replicating that sales approach. So I would say, I've always known, to answer your question, I've always known that was a replicable thing. It's just a matter, did I want to take the time and put the money in, and investment in order to replicate it? If we're doing really well and we have, we're growing our business and doubling our size every 3 years, why would I want to take that money and invest into it unless I really wanted to blow it up and take that short-term cash loss for the long-term game of the company? Wasn't really ready for that until we actually merged with Anders, and they wanted to grow up from, the $10 million we were at to the $50 million idea. And I thought, well, this is a great way of doing it. Let's just replicate the model and invest a little bit and see how the long-term plays out.
And I definitely think it took time. Like, I was involved in some of those conversations and saw some of the work that you and Kelly and our marketing team did of like, okay, we know what the process is, but it was all up here. Like, actually taking that process and documenting it and saying, okay, this is how we do it for another niche was really important. So I appreciate you giving that insight. And I think that hopefully our listeners can listen to that and be like, oh, this is my process. This is my philosophy. Write it and be like, how can I do that in other areas to really scale your business up? So I appreciate you going through that. So we're on to our last category. So just remind our listeners, this will always be one of our categories because we want to make sure we close with something positive. And so this is category number 11, the mic drop moment. This is the one thing that, okay, this is the one thing you want to take away from this podcast. So I'm curious what your item was, and I'll go back to mine after that.
Yeah, my item kind of fell in the same boat as the other ones, really, and it maybe a different flavor. And I think it was the effective email marketing campaign that they were talking about. And hey, how can we get an email marketing campaign to work? And in this case, it was putting it on paper, right? They did a Washington Post ad type of thing, and that's how they were able to get that and how it really able to blow it up. And so it was nice to be able to identify, hey, here's the approach that we're going to take. And email marketing, I did some research on this. I don't know the exact stat because I've a lot of different numbers going through my head at the moment. But with that, email marketing was probably one of the most effective ways of marketing. And, with that, I think it's important to make sure those emails are qualified and they're not just simply sent out to everybody and anybody. But in this case, they devised an approach in order to be able to get those emails. And that was through this pizza giveaway program. And I thought that was a genius idea. And I think just thinking outside the box is really the key to all of that. And, thinking outside the box, when you think about it, McDonald's does things like this all the time where they will bring back the McRib sandwich. They only bring it back for a short period of time and they see sales spike, for that sandwich, that they could offer throughout the year. Because again, a very good sandwich and very good for them. But again, that's the spike that they have. And you see it with different shakes that, maybe restaurants will have. Maybe they'll have the, hey, let's have the, the snow cone shake for, during, December or something like that, which, draws people to it. And so again, just being creative with the marketing ideas, find out what works, whether if it's email marketing, if it's another form of marketing, whatever that might be, just be creative in the way that you go about doing it. And I think you're going to find, better results than just simply staying with the norm for whatever that might be.
I love the nacho fry campaign, the way they do that at Taco Bell. Like they have commercials like locked away that they're ready to use whenever they're going to have those things out there. And it's okay, we're gonna release the nacho fry again for these 3 months. Let's bring all these commercials out. Let's get this giant campaign, and then we'll remove them, and then we'll do it again. Like, I think that's brilliant marketing. And again, I know as someone who, I don't go to Taco Bell a ton, but when they have nacho fries, I will definitely make that stop a couple more times than I normally do.
Yep.
So my mic drop moment was something you mentioned earlier, and we really haven't talked about a ton. So I want to kind of dive into this a little bit. Is the they used a couple different words for this, but they talked about land and expand. The front, get your foot in the door, that type of thing. And I thought Jason talked about this. And Jason, when we interviewed him, said, he kind of had the secret sauce. And I think he kind of tipped his hand a little bit in this podcast. I think this was his secret sauce, was he has that, real quick thing that he can sell, and he can sell it really quickly. He's like, I can close this product in a week, right? I can close this in a week versus those 30 days or 60 days or 90 days that we're talking about. And then once someone's spending money with you, guess what? They build trust with you. They know you. You're already an approved vendor. And he kind of used the McDonald's example of like, you want fries with that. Like that's their highest profit margin. Like, yeah, I may be only charging $500 for this one product, but once the client knows me and once the customer knows me, they're going to start working with me again. They're going to want to keep working with me. And then I can have an unlimited pipeline with the client. So I thought that was huge. And I think it kind of gave away Jason's secret sauce of how he grew his businesses so quick was he had that real quick sale, got that relationship with the client, and then was able to expand from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're trying something very similar to that with, providing just a real quick financial statement with industry comparison. Something super, I wouldn't say easy for us to do, but easier for us to do than a full blown engagement would be, and a client would get a lot of benefit from it. And we're trying to push that out as an opportunity to, hey, here's what you can get. If this is all you need, perfect. Then don't worry about it. Here's the small dollar amount that goes with it. But again, if you would want more, then we can offer more. And I think that's a very similar approach. We just started doing that over the last year, and it's been pretty successful so far.
Yeah, so I'd say if any of our listeners have been listening to us for a while and they're like, gosh, I just can't afford to work with Summit, or hope I can work with Summit someday, I think this is an awesome opportunity for you to jump in with us, as we have this really cheap alternative. If you feel like your books are in a pretty good place, you can just send us your books and we'll send you a financial statement, and you can start looking at that and start seeing some of the insights that we talk about a lot and some of the industry information that's out there. So this is just a good opportunity for people that have been listening to us for a while that might want to start working with us. That's a great opportunity. And again, I know it's like Jody said, it's definitely a marketing campaign, but we want you guys to get to know us, because we think once you get to know us, you'll want to keep working with us. So that's an awesome opportunity for you guys to connect with us. So appreciate you bringing up that, Jody. Awesome. So that's all the topics. I think, again, the interesting thing I picked up from this podcast, Jody, is we both listened to the same podcast, but we had some different takeaways this time. Like, I think the marketing stuff really resonated with you, and I think the system and foot in the door stuff kind of really resonated with me. So it's interesting. Two different people who work in the same industry listened to a 25-minute podcast and took some different stuff out of it. So I think that's the benefit of this type of format here. So hopefully you enjoyed the show and enjoyed talking about it.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend listening to the podcast. It's a great podcast, and Jason's got tons of different things. I think he's on like 700 podcasts, and so there's a lot of great stuff to glean from what he's been providing. I would do what I would recommend one of two things. Take a look at his earlier podcast and realize how poorly he speaks. Then take a look at our earlier podcast and realize how poorly Jamie speaks. Very similar, and you'll get some enjoyment out of it.
I agree. I was terrible, at least for probably the first 20 episodes. So thanks for bringing that up again, Jody.
Hey, no worries.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We love doing these shows. We'll keep doing them. I have another one that I'm excited about sending over to Jody that just came out a couple days ago. So I'm going to send that one over to Jody, and we'll get another one of these out quickly. So appreciate everybody.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, summitcpa.net, to get more tips and strategy for achieving business success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.